The air in the penthouse office was thick with polished menace, smelling of aged leather and quiet violence. Marcus Reed, accustomed to silence being its own threat, leaned forward, awaiting the final terms of the debt transfer. The heavy mahogany door did not knock. It simply opened, and a girl no older than 8 stepped into the room. Her winter coat was too big, her backpack slumped low. She looked directly at Marcus, past his 2 suited guards, and said in a clear, unbroken voice, "My brother needs the money urgently. He's dying, so I came instead." Marcus, the man they called the ice broker for his unfeeling precision, froze, his hand inches from the signed contract. The contradiction, death, danger, and a second-grade backpack, shattered the carefully constructed tension. Marcus sat utterly still after the guards finally ushered the small girl out, the room now echoing louder than before. He didn't move to finish the paperwork or call his security detail. He simply looked at the space where she had stood, a spot now visibly empty, a void in the metallic coldness of the office. The penthouse was a fortress, not designed for warmth. Its walls were smoked glass, offering a panoramic view of the city lights that never slept, mimicking the constant low-level vigilance he maintained. He preferred the quiet hum of the server room to human voices. He ran a thumb across the smooth, cold surface of his desk, an involuntary gesture he often performed when distracted. Everything in his environment was deliberate, hard lines, precise angles, and zero clutter. A single untouched glass of amber liquid sat near his elbow. He hadn't drunk it. He rarely did. It was merely a placeholder, a prop for the image of control. His tailored suit felt less like clothing and more like armor. He had built this empire block by painstaking, unforgiving block, ensuring no one could ever get close enough to inflict damage again. His reflection in the dark glass showed a man perfectly composed, but the faint, almost invisible tension around his jawline betrayed the constant internal pressure. He picked up a small, smooth river stone from a silver tray, the only non-utilitarian object he allowed himself. He turned it over and over in his palm. It was cool, grounded, and utterly unremarkable, pulled from a riverbed decades ago. The stone was a silent anchor, a connection to a time before the necessary hardening, a time he never spoke of. He placed it back down, the faint click sound loud in the silence. The brother the girl spoke of, the debt, the impossibility of the situation. It all felt like unnecessary noise, threatening the meticulous order he had imposed on his life. He pushed away from the desk, the heavy leather chair sighing under his weight, and walked towards the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the indifferent city. He was alone, and had carefully curated that aloneness, yet the echo of the child's voice still resonated in the vast empty space. The girl, whose name was Lily, was sitting on a hard, plastic bench in the lobby of the building 20 minutes later, sipping lukewarm water from a paper cone. Across the street, nestled between a laundromat and a defunct hardware store, was the Corner Grind, a small coffee shop defined by the smell of slightly burnt espresso and steamed milk. Sarah had owned the place for 7 years. Her hands were permanently stained by coffee grounds, and her eyes held the persistent fatigue of someone who opened the doors before dawn, but her movements were efficient and grounded. She was currently wiping down the counter for the 3rd time that hour, listening to the quiet murmur of the news on the radio. Lily's older brother, Kevin, was supposed to be working the back counter today, but he hadn't shown up. Kevin was a quiet boy, barely 18 and perpetually worried. He worked 2 jobs to cover the medical costs of his heart condition. Sarah knew the story, not because Kevin had asked for pity, but because she listened when people spoke. A gust of cold air announced the entrance of a regular Mr. Henderson, whose mobility scooter often bumped the worn welcome mat. "Morning, Sarah. Regular dark roast, please." "Coming right up, Mr. H," she replied, her voice soft but steady. She moved swiftly, pouring the coffee and adding exactly 2 teaspoons of sugar without being asked. That was Sarah's brand of kindness, anticipating the need before it was voiced. She offered the coffee with a small smile, not a dramatic flourish, but a quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity. Suddenly the door swung open again, and Lily walked in, her nose red from the cold, her backpack still too heavy. She hesitated, looking lost. Sarah immediately stopped wiping the counter. "Lily? Honey, "What are you doing here? Where's Kevin?" Lily shrugged off her massive coat, her eyes wide and truthful. "He's sleeping. He had a bad chest night. I came to tell you he can't work today. I told Mr. Reed the same thing." Sarah paused, taking in the full weight of that statement. She didn't press about Marcus Reed, sensing the danger in the name. Instead, she knelt, matching Lily's height. "Okay, thank you for telling me, sweetie. You must be freezing. Let's get you some hot chocolate and a piece of that stale blueberry scone." She didn't coddle or panic. She just offered immediate, practical warmth. Lily's shoulders visibly relaxed as she slid onto a high stool. Sarah looked around her small, imperfect shop, feeling the exhaustion settle deep in her shoulders, but her focus remained on the girl. She began steaming milk, her routine a shield against the larger, frightening truths of the world. Seeing this little moment of practical kindness, I have to ask, where are you watching this story unfold right now? Marcus Reed found himself back on the sidewalk, a mile from his office, his tailored suit feeling ridiculously out of place. He wasn't supposed to be walking. He was supposed to be preparing for an evening negotiation. But the image of the small girl in his office had lodged itself in his mind, a sharp shard of absurdity he couldn't dislodge. His security team had traced the debt quickly, a low-level loan shark whose paper was acquired during a recent acquisition, belonging to a boy named Kevin who worked at a coffee shop. He stopped in front of a window display showcasing faded gardening tools. Across the street, the sign for the corner grind glowed dimly. It was the address on the file. He pushed open the heavy glass door of the coffee shop. The bell above the entrance chimed too brightly, cutting through the jazz music playing softly. The place was warm, almost humid, smelling strongly of sugar and cheap fabric softener. Marcus felt an immediate visceral discomfort with the lack of sharp edges. Sarah looked up, wiping a stray strand of hair from her forehead. She recognized the quality of his suit instantly, and the controlled severity in his posture. He looked like an expense account had walked in and was deeply offended by the worn floorboards. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice neutral. She was preparing a takeout order for Lily, a small bag containing the aforementioned scone and a carton of hot chocolate. Lily was drawing on a napkin, oblivious. Marcus simply looked past Sarah to the girl. "I'm looking for Kevin's sister." Sarah set down the cup. Her gaze hardened slightly, not with defiance, but with a quiet readiness to protect. "She's right here, and Kevin isn't in today. He's ill." Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on Lily's messy drawing. "I am aware." He reached into his coat pocket and placed a pristine, folded envelope on the counter. "This is for him. It's regarding the debt." Sarah looked from the envelope to Marcus's expressionless face. There was no threat there, but no warmth either, just absolute stillness. "You could have mailed it," she pointed out gently. "It requires delivery in person," he replied, the lie easy and practiced. He couldn't explain that he had needed to confirm the absurdity of the morning. Lily looked up then, her eyes landing on the expensive, imposing man. She didn't cower. She just tilted her head. "Did you bring the money back?" The question was so direct, so lacking in manipulative expectation, that it momentarily stripped the practiced composure from Marcus's face. He paused, then picked up the envelope and slid it into his inner pocket. "No, I brought myself instead." He turned to leave, but Sarah's hand shot out, not to touch him, but to slide a steaming mug across the counter. "You look like you need something hot. On the house." It was a small, uncalculated offering. He looked at the simple ceramic mug filled with plain black coffee, a momentary hesitation in his eyes. He didn't need the coffee, but he realized suddenly that he hadn't been offered something without expectation in decades. He nodded once, a minimal acknowledgement, and stayed, drinking the coffee slowly by the window, while Lily continued to draw. The silence was not hostile, it was merely shared. A fragile space had opened. Marcus stood by the window, the mug warming his hands, the saccharine smell of cocoa and the sound of Lily's focused scribbling, creating an unfamiliar, heavy atmosphere. The warmth of the shop felt almost suffocating, reminding him of other small, enclosed spaces he preferred to forget. His eyes fell on Lily's backpack, resting against the leg of her stool. It was scuffed and frayed at the edges, clearly well used and likely passed down. The sight of it triggered an instantaneous sharp pull backwards. He was 7 years old, sitting on the top step of a wide concrete staircase leading up to a social worker's office. He wasn't crying. He hadn't cried in months, but the cold of the step was soaking through his thin trousers. He clutched his own backpack, a cheap, bright blue canvas sack, like a life raft. Inside there was nothing of value: 2 bruised apples, a comic book he had read 50 times, and the smooth river stone. He had been told to wait. His mother, who had promised to return after running one last errand, had never come back. He waited for 4 hours. The social worker finally found him, silent and rigid, clinging to the strap of the bag. The shame wasn't in the abandonment itself, but in the crushing realization that his entire existence, everything he owned, everything he was, could fit into that small, pathetic blue sack and still not be enough for someone to stay. The backpack had represented both his isolation and the final finite proof of his dispensability. The memory was less a flash of feeling and more a chilling fact. The fact of being left. The stone in his office drawer was that same river stone, a grim trophy of survival. He shifted his weight, pulling himself back from the concrete staircase to the warm wood of the coffee shop. Lily looked up from her drawing, sensing his attention. "You look sad," she stated plainly, tilting her head again. Marcus straightened, regaining his composure. "I am not sad. I'm thinking." Lily considered this. Thinking about what? About things that are gone. Lily tapped her pencil against the drawing of a lopsided house. "My brother says the bad things aren't really gone until you give away the sad feeling they left behind." Marcus simply stared at her, the child's simplistic philosophy hitting with the force of an actual truth. He took a long, hot sip of the coffee Sarah had given him, coffee he did not want, but suddenly desperately needed to ground him. He set the mug down slightly too hard on the counter, the small clatter emphasizing the fragile nature of his control. The debt remained technically active, but the interest payments stopped being collected. Marcus had quietly absorbed the paper into his own holdings, ensuring the loan shark was cut out. This meant he had a reason, albeit fabricated, to keep checking in. Twice a week, Marcus would detour from his standard route and enter the corner grind precisely at 7:45 a.m. He never stayed long, never took off his jacket, and always ordered the same thing. Black coffee, no sugar, served in the same thick ceramic mug. Sarah never commented on his presence. She simply acknowledged him with a quiet, "Morning, Marcus," and got to work. Her gentle routine was the gravitational center of the small, chaotic shop. She moved among the customers with the same practical efficiency, never rushing, never lingering. She wasn't seeking his approval or offering pity. She was merely maintaining a safe, stable environment. Lily became the unconscious catalyst for the growing routine. Kevin was still too frail to return to work consistently, so Lily often stopped by on her way to school, usually to relay information about Kevin's health or to simply collect a promised, slightly burnt bagel. One Tuesday, Lily was struggling to tie her perpetually tangled scarf. She watched Marcus, the man of sharp lines and silence, drinking his coffee by the window. "My knots never stay," she complained to the air, not expecting a response. Marcus set his mug down. He walked over, knelt down, a jarring sight for anyone accustomed to his imposing height, and meticulously tied the scarf. He used a precise knot that looked utilitarian and secure. He didn't smile. He simply performed the task with the same concentration he applied to complex financial transactions. "That's a square knot," he explained, his voice low. "It holds." "Thank you, Mr. Reed," she said, touching the thick wool. Sarah, observing the exchange from behind the counter, didn't interfere. She just quietly stacked clean mugs, realizing that Marcus was starting to feel inclusion, not through grand gestures, but through small necessary tasks. He wasn't being saved, he was simply being needed in a way that didn't involve money or power. The shop transformed into a strange, unofficial base. Marcus would often read the morning paper, the business section spread out on a small table, while Sarah prepared the daily specials, and Lily drew pictures of cartoon animals that always seemed to have slightly worried expressions. He was an anomaly in the landscape, but he was no longer an intrusion. He was becoming part of the landscape, the quiet, watchful sentinel in the corner, allowing the warmth of unplanned belonging to seep slowly, almost painfully, into the fortified cracks he'd spent a lifetime creating. The routine was solidifying, and with it the silent, fragile hope that something could finally hold. The fragile routine shattered on a cold Friday afternoon. Kevin, looking pale but determined, had returned to the shop, insisting he was well enough to work a short shift. Marcus arrived late, just after the lunch rush, finding the shop chaotic and crowded. Kevin was struggling to keep up, his movements slow and punctuated by involuntary pauses to catch his breath. Lily was sitting nearby, watching her brother with a worried intensity, her usual bright curiosity subdued. A complex order for 5 lattes came in. Kevin, reaching for a carton of heavy cream on the top shelf, swayed slightly. His hand slipped. The large carton tumbled down, narrowly missing Mr. Henderson and splattering across the pristine leather briefcase of a new, well-dressed customer, a man who clearly belonged in Marcus's world, not Sarah's. The customer reacted instantly, his voice sharp and accusatory. "Watch what you're doing, kid, that's genuine hide." Kevin froze, his face flushing crimson, struggling for breath, unable to apologize effectively. Marcus, instinctively moving toward the escalating conflict, stepped in front of Kevin, his presence immediately silencing the customer. "I suggest you take the cleaning bill and leave," Marcus said, his tone devoid of inflection, which somehow made it 10 times more threatening. But the moment of protection was twisted by a simple, truthful misinterpretation. The customer sneered, pointing at Kevin. "He owes you money, doesn't he? That's why you're here, protecting your asset." The word asset struck the small, crowded space like a blow. Lily gasped softly. Sarah looked at Marcus, her face draining of color. She knew about the debt, but she hadn't fully processed the clinical reality of his involvement, that he owned Kevin's financial liability. "Is that why you've been coming here, Marcus?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet and steady, but edged with hurt. "To monitor the collateral." Marcus had no immediate defense. The simplicity of his intention to simply exist in a space that felt safe was irrelevant against the cold, hard fact of the debt. He owned the paper. He was the creditor. He was, in essence, the danger Kevin still faced, however passively. "The loan is secured," Marcus stated, falling back on the sterile language of his business, hoping to quell the emotional fire with bureaucratic ice. It was the worst possible thing he could have said. Lily stood up quickly, her small hands balled into fists, tears welling in her eyes. "You said you came instead. You didn't come instead of the bad thing. You were the bad thing." The honesty was devastating. Marcus felt the structure he'd tentatively allowed himself to build collapse under the weight of his own history. He was always the abandoned, and now he was confirmed as the abandoner. He looked at Sarah's expression, a mixture of disappointment and weary acceptance, and knew he couldn't undo the harm with words. He simply turned, not offering an explanation, not apologizing, and walked out. The silence in the shop was heavy, broken only by the sound of Sarah calmly instructing Kevin to sit down and breathe. The silent, non-committal community they had forged was destroyed, leaving a bitter sense of shared loss in its wake. Marcus returned to his fortress-like office, the coldness of the glass walls now matching the interior chill of his own making. He sat at his desk, but the precision of the numbers on his screen offered no comfort. Lily's words, "You are the bad thing," replayed constantly. He recognized the feeling, the inevitable outcome of letting anyone close. Eventually, the truth of his controlled, predatory existence would always surface. He didn't call Sarah. He didn't send flowers or apologies. Those were useless gestures designed for self-absolution, not true repair. His internal transformation, the slow shift from pure self-preservation to a desire to protect something fragile, had to be demonstrated through action, action that required no witness or recognition. He accessed the full file on Kevin. The debt itself was minor, but the collateral risk was exponential. The real danger wasn't the debt, it was the looming possibility of a necessary, expensive surgery Kevin required. The family was uninsured, living on the edge of catastrophe. The initial small loan was merely a symptom of the desperate situation. Marcus spent the next 48 hours dismantling his legal involvement. He didn't just forgive the debt. He dissolved it and removed all associated records, eliminating any potential claim by any future acquisition. He ensured the paperwork was airtight, making Kevin and Lily entirely invisible to the corporate machine he commanded. This was simple cleanup. The true decision came when he addressed the larger issue. He contacted a discreet, high-end medical foundation he secretly funded, one that specialized in complex cardiac care for underprivileged youth. He established a new anonymous trust fund. He didn't earmark it for Kevin, but for an immediate, urgent case matching Kevin's profile. The donation was massive, enough to cover the surgery, the long recovery, and the subsequent care, with a substantial surplus remaining for the foundation's general use. He had his senior assistant manage the transfer of funds and communication with the hospital, stressing absolute anonymity. Marcus's name was not to appear anywhere. He didn't want gratitude. He wanted to eliminate the source of the fear that had driven Lily to his office in the first place. His choice was not redemption, it was an act of silent protection, a move motivated by the searing memory of his own childhood fear. He wasn't doing it to earn a place in their lives, but to ensure their lives could exist peacefully without him. He was choosing to shield them from the kind of power he wielded, stepping back into the shadow so that they might step into the light. He finished the paperwork, sealed the digital file, and closed the laptop. The room was silent again, but the heavy weight that had rested on his chest since the encounter finally felt a fraction lighter. 3 days later, the hospital called Sarah. Kevin's condition had worsened quickly, and the only path forward was immediate surgery. The doctor explained that a specific complex cardiac foundation, working anonymously, had transferred the full required funds, ensuring the procedure would happen within 24 hours. Sarah felt a profound, exhausting relief, coupled with a deep, unsettling certainty about the source of the donation. Marcus did not receive a call or a text. He knew the transfer was complete and the procedure was underway. He did not go to the hospital. Instead, late that evening, he drove his black sedan slowly past Kevin and Lily's small, quiet apartment building. The single light on their second floor was off. He kept driving, but something invisible tugged at him. He found himself on the same street corner, looking at the dark facade of the corner grind. He parked and simply sat there for an hour, watching the steam curl from the storm drains. Eventually he saw movement. Sarah was locking up, the fatigue visible in the slump of her shoulders, her face etched with worry from the long day. Lily was clinging to her coat, half asleep. Marcus stepped out of the car. His footsteps crunched on the icy sidewalk, loud in the late-night quiet. Sarah stopped instantly, pulling Lily closer. She didn't look surprised, only tired. "He's in surgery," she stated, cutting straight to the point, leaving no room for small talk. "They told me everything is covered." Marcus simply nodded. He didn't confirm or deny his involvement. He knew the explanation would contaminate the purity of the action. "He will be fine," Marcus said, his voice flat, a professional assurance of certainty, not comfort. Lily, roused by the sound of his voice, peered out from behind Sarah's coat. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes still heavy with sleep and fear. "We missed you," she mumbled, the simple truth of her attachment cutting through the heavy tension of the night. "Your coffee mug is still clean on the shelf." Sarah watched Marcus's face. The man of stone flinched, not from pain, but from the unbearable weight of being missed. "I needed to handle a complication," he explained, still avoiding eye contact. "A permanent complication?" Sarah pressed softly, understanding that he was talking about the debt, about his own need to be free of that dynamic. "Yes," Marcus confirmed, "permanent." He paused, reaching into his pocket. He didn't offer money. He offered the small, smooth river stone. He knelt down before Lily, placing the cool stone into her hand. "This holds," he told her, referencing the knot he'd tied. "It's solid, no matter what happens. Keep it." He didn't wait for a response. He stood, gave Sarah one final, grave look that acknowledged the silent transaction of protection and withdrawal, and walked back to the car. He had chosen to protect and chosen to leave, maintaining the required distance. But Lily's small hand clutching the stone was the first physical, tangible connection to another person he had allowed in decades. 6 weeks later, Kevin was home. The recovery was slow, but the frightening fragility had been replaced by a quiet, sustainable strength. Lily was thriving, relieved of her burden of worry. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sun, pale and hesitant, filtered into the small apartment living room. Kevin was resting on the sofa, watching a muted basketball game. Sarah was knitting a perpetually unfinished scarf in the worn armchair. She wasn't their mother, but she was definitely their anchor. She had moved her routine, her stabilizing presence, into their small world. The door buzzer rang, an unexpected noise. Kevin looked up, startled. Sarah answered the intercom. "It's Marcus," she reported, her voice calm. "He wants to know if you can fix a broken toaster." Kevin, confused but amused, smiled faintly. "I don't fix toasters, Sarah." "He knows that," she said, opening the door. Marcus stood in the hallway looking slightly awkward, holding a dented old toaster. He was wearing clothes that were still expensive, but were clearly not his usual armor. Dark jeans and a thick, high-quality sweater. He entered the apartment, the small space immediately feeling denser. He didn't offer apologies or grand statements. He simply put the toaster on the small kitchen table. "It's malfunctioning," he stated, his eyes scanning the room, landing on the small, framed photo of Kevin and Lily on the shelf, a photo that looked suspiciously like the lopsided house Lily had drawn weeks ago. Lily rushed over to him, holding out her hand. The river stone, now looped onto a piece of frayed string, hung from her wrist. "The knot held," she announced proudly. "It always will," Marcus replied, his voice almost a whisper. He stayed for only 20 minutes. He talked to Kevin, not about debt or his company, but about the mechanics of a simple coffee grinder Sarah needed for the shop. A quiet, neutral discussion about things that worked and things that were broken. He was not a guest. He was an extension of the silence, a fixture of reliable presence. As he stood to leave, Kevin, still weak, looked directly at him. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything, for staying when you didn't have to." Marcus looked from Kevin to Sarah, who merely gave him a small, tired smile of understanding. He looked at Lily, who was already back on the floor, drawing. "I didn't stay," Marcus corrected, his hand resting on the doorknob. "I returned. There's a difference." He stepped out, leaving the warm light behind. Family wasn't blood relation or legal bond. It was the simple choice to return, to be the steady anchor, and to defend the fragile light of belonging. The icebreaker was learning that true power wasn't in taking, but in the quiet, absolute decision to protect what you had never planned to own. If this story of silent choices and unexpected belonging resonated with you, show us by hitting that like button right now. Leave a comment telling us which character's choice impacted you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional stories that feel absolutely real.